Awesome. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy to be here with everyone today. We are going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of an intro, and then we'll turn it over to Simon to take it away. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins at the Maintenance Community by Upkeep. Thank you for making the time to be with us on this fine Thursday. If you're not already a member of the Maintenance Community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. I will add the link in the chat in just a moment on how to sign up. Today, we have Simon Murray joining for a presentation on setting up your CMMS for success. I will again let him introduce himself in just a moment, but I know we're in store for a great presentation today. The recording from our session will be available at this link right after we end our presentation, as well as in the Maintenance Community Slack group tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides that you see here today. Simon is also available to answer questions in the Slack group, so please feel free to share the recording of this webinar or the invitation to Slack directly with friends, colleagues, or anyone else you know who would benefit from hearing some of Simon's expertise. My last piece of housekeeping, and then we'll get started with our main presentation for today. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are not turned on today, so what you'll want to do if you have any questions to ask of Simon as we go through the presentation is you'll use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen there. So feel free to chat your questions as they come up, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of our time today. Anything we don't get to during our allotted time, we will answer offline in the community for you as well. That's it from me. Thank you again, Simon, for being here and everyone else for making the time. And Simon, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Pleasure. Thanks, Heather. So let me just click on the right bits. Okay, welcome everybody. I see on the list we've got quite a few people over there from the US, quite a few from Australia as well. So welcome to you guys. I'm here in a very wet, windy and cold Melbourne. So today I want to talk about set your CMMS. So where's this come from? Well, so as Heather said, my name's Simon Murray, your maintenance coach. I've been in manufacturing maintenance for getting on for 20 odd years now. And in 2012, I founded Your Maintenance Coach. And since then, the vast majority of my work has actually been helping businesses to implement CMMS systems from scratch or reconfigure and improve what they have. Do lots in that planning and scheduling space, which obviously feeds back to how we set our CMMS up. And what I want to do today with you is, you work with dozens of different businesses, you do dozens of different implementations. And while lots of those businesses I'm kind of helping and showing them the way, there's always something in each of these different businesses I've worked with that you take away and say, that's a great way to do that. I'm going to use it in future. And what I want to share with you today is, I suppose, the top sort of half a dozen things that I've picked up over the years that have really really helped people to accelerate their CMMS journey. So let's start with this. What's the problem I see first? The problems that I see with most CMMS implementations. Well, the first one is that they're very much a closed box. Yeah. So what I mean by this, I go into businesses, say, let's have a look at your setup. Doesn't matter what system it is. Doesn't matter what software vendor it is. We say, show me what's going on in there. Let's have a look at your analytics, your reports, your history. How are you using that information? And people come back and say, oh, we don't know. The PMs come out each week, we print them off and away we go and do them. It's not a good way to use that investment. Second problem I see is the system can be very, very hard to drive. We set a system up often as a well-intentioned maintenance planner, well-intentioned engineer. I've been in that position myself. But we set it up in this is how we're going to set it up to serve my purpose. And we often forget that, down the track, tradesmen are going to be using it, reliability engineers, stores person. So if we set it up just looking at one position, that system can be very, very hard to drive for everybody else. And of course, they become disengaged with it. Third big problem, and this is how to tell if your CMMS is actually adding value to the business. When it's not, there's stuff everywhere in the business. Okay, and what do I mean by stuff? Well, I mean manuals are in the shelves, they're stored on paper, drawings are in somebody's desk. Service reports may be kept, may not be kept. You got no documented history of the jobs. Reliability information, it's not all in that CMMS. It's scattered everywhere because nobody trusts that main bit of software. They think I'm going to put it in there and I'll never see it again. But let's flip this. What's the opportunity that we have here? What does good systems look like? Well, first of all, absolute transparency. Yeah, I want to see absolute transparency on everything that's in there, on our work rates, our performance, our backlog. Nothing's hidden. Yeah, it's all there, ready to be used. The whole system is very easy to use for everybody. So we've gone through, and this is, the software developers actually do this. They've developed their software to think, what do I need to do if I'm a tradesman? What do I need to do if I'm a maintenance manager? What do I need to do if I'm an engineering manager? So the system's actually built to be easy to use. But what we do when we configure it is we make it difficult again, and we undo all of that good work. And finally, instead of having stuff everywhere, I want the system to be used as a single source of truth. Yeah, I want everyone to be using the maintenance software, the CMMS, knowing I can put things in there with confidence. So it's a bit of an overview of what we want to get to. But the guts of today's presentation, I want to focus on 6 key areas. And these are the 6 key areas that I see make the most benefit. And often these are, some of these are your control files or your settings in the system, some of the overall architecture. So I want to talk about the asset tree. I want to show you a PM naming convention. I want to talk about work order statuses, priorities, job types, and using a couple of key dates. Now, a bit of a disclaimer before we get into this. Setting up CMMSs and for 20 years, and some of these have been helping people change what they have. I can tell you, go into someone who's already set a system up. The passion and engagement around that system is usually stronger than their own family or even their sports team. Yeah, try going into a business and telling someone they've set up their CMMS wrong, or they can do it better. It's a tough conversation. So first disclaimer is you're probably doing things a little bit differently. This system doesn't work for everybody. So what I really want you to take out of this is have a look at not necessarily the specific naming, not necessarily the specific numeric codes, but think about the objective that I'm trying to achieve with this and make sure you're achieving the same objective. There isn't one size fits all for this. It's not black and white. It's about how you adapt the principles here into your business. So let's jump into the asset tree. What am I looking at when I see an asset tree? How do I set up an asset tree? So in each of these sections, going to do a bit of pros and cons, and then I'll give you some examples of how I actually do it. So the problems I see, sometimes we can organize the tree by asset type. And what I mean by that is inexperienced people I often see set up, let's put all our filling machines together. Let's put all of our robots together in the tree. So we're actually organizing things by asset type rather than by the flow of the process. So that's the biggest mistake. People don't follow the flow of the process. A good asset tree, when we see it, actually, as you walk through that tree and that asset list, you can actually visualize walking through either the production line or the process. If it's an office block, you can visualize yourself walking through the block and seeing all of these assets. And the third one I see, and I think I'm pretty convinced that there's a secret global competition going on that, and I can't find out who's running it, but there is a secret global competition amongst engineers who set up CMMSs to create the most complex naming convention possible. To see who can come up with a naming convention that adds no value to the business, has the most characters in it, and is the most confusing thing we can develop. And as engineers, we love that type of conversation, don't we? So what I want you to do is think about that, and I'll show you some examples. Now, when you're setting your asset tree up, the points I want you to think about the user experience. Again, think about who's going to be using your asset tree. It's not just the planner and the maintenance manager. Down the track, you might have operations personnel putting requests into the system. They need to be able to navigate that tree. You might have tradesmen coming in at a weekend who don't understand the site, spend very little time there. There might be contract staff. They need to navigate that tree to be able to find the assets they're working on. So think about the user experience for each of your end users. Who's in the team? Who's going to be looking at this tree? Structure the tree for easy scheduling. This is one I teach a lot of, and a lot of people miss it. So just think for a second, you're sitting down, you're going to schedule all of your work, let's say for next week. Now, the process I use is to go into that asset tree, pick the asset, the production line, for example, that's going to be stopped on a particular day next week. And I want to see all of the work that's available on that production line. Now, if your tree is structured correctly, all of the assets that are going to stop at the same time are all going to be grouped together in that filter. But if your tree is structured, as we said earlier on, where your robots are all together and your fillers are in one group and your case packers are at another end and your service equipment somewhere else, the schedule's actually got to look in 4 or 5 different places to see all of the work that needs to be done on that day. So structure your tree for easy scheduling. And finally, simple but meaningful naming. Yeah, and we can debate for days on end how complex the naming gets. And again, I understand different systems allow you to do different things, and very much different industries. I spend a lot of time researching so-called best practice. A lot of it comes from military, aviation, really highly regulated industries. So make sure your industry, not every industry needs best practice aviation naming conventions. Let me share with you how I name asset trees. Level number 1 is often our site code. And this actual example is from a business. They've got about 2-3 dozen sites around the country. And we've recently just gone through a standardization process with them. So it's a good example to use. Site 1, so we put something in there for our site code. I understand which site it is. Level 2, functional grouping. So you can see here, this is where I'm classifying my groups: site services, mobile assets, production assets. Still almost, I think in upkeep, this would be called, or still locations here, still categories. And you'll see here in the asset code, a couple of points. One is I've maintained the site name. So VLN in this case becomes the beginning of the asset code for the next level. Second point on this one, you'll see I've used numbers 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. The reason for that is in this particular system that I'm using as an example here, I'm going to upkeep similar, it sorts the asset tree alphanumerically. So if you want these assets in a particular order, in this case I did, most frequently used to least frequently used, I've put those numbers in there to force the order rather than the lettering. And then our third level, and again, you can see now I'm into sort of lines, production lines and categories. So as an example of my production assets here, this might be a can making line, can making factory. So I've got a print room, can line 1, 2, 3, and a packaging area. And again, you can see I'm just adding different digits on. Now, this is a little bit of a unique example because this business already had some naming conventions in place. So you can see, some of these are, these are all 3 and 4, 5 digits long, probably a little bit longer than I would expect if I was setting this up from scratch, but something was already pre-existing in place. Now you can see also in our site services side, chilled water, cooling towers, these don't need to be in a specific order. So there's no numbers in there. We've just used something that makes sense. Okay. That's kind of the naming convention I'm using here. So you can see the asset code doesn't mean a huge lot. Yeah, it's really used there to organize, to categorize. And this is an example of what that looks like actually in the tree. So it's a different factory, but this goes down to level 6. This is an injection molding machine that we're looking at here. And a couple of really important points here that you'll find useful as you go. So first of all, you'll see there's a hyphen or a dash in between. And I've used that hyphen or dash to separate locations to assets, where our location, you can call it a location, you can call it a grouping or a category, but really anything before the dash isn't really a maintainable asset. Anything after the dash generally is. Second point I always look at with my asset trees, I try to never have more than 12 children to a parent. Okay, so this level 6 here, we've got what we got there, probably 8 or 10. As that list grows and grows, becomes much more difficult for your tradesmen to start navigating that list as they go. Saw one line recently, someone put in, I think they had 50, it was a production line with 50 assets in one list, all sorted alphanumerically, so they weren't in the order of the flow, and nobody could find anything. And what happened with that is all of the work, all of the job requests, all of the actions went to the parent line, which obviously doesn't help us down the track. Third point here, you can see the parent code cascades into the child. Yeah. Why is that important? Well, it's important for me because I want to go on here and see, okay, CO2 blow molder. Now, this particular business across the country have probably got half a dozen CO2 blow molders because each factory uses a similar naming convention. I want to be able to look at that and see which factory that machine is at from a national perspective. I want to be able to group all my blow molders or my printers together across the whole group for procurement purposes maybe, and see where they're all sat. So it's a useful way to do that. Again, people say, well, that location's already, it's in the asset details, it's in the master data. Yes, it is, but how easy is it to tell it from the description? How much easier does that make life? Third, and this is always an interesting, the code does not say what type of asset it is. Yeah, okay, so many asset sort of codes, this is the number on the left-hand side. People say, well, let's put in there a couple of digits that tell us it's a conveyor or it's a pump or it's a motor. And that can be useful, but also it can be very, very complicated to maintain. Now, if I go in and I'm setting something up from scratch, or you're setting your system up from scratch, you've got the time and the patience to actually keep referring back to your manual of what asset code we're going to use in there. But again, think of this 2 years down the track when you've got a brand new maintenance planner in place who's actually got to try and maintain that themselves. Yeah, your data integrity potentially is going to go all over the place. Again, if you're a highly regulated business with a really structured department, you could use that. But for most of us, it's probably a bit of overkill and very complicated system to maintain. Now, final point here. Every asset description tells everybody exactly what and where that asset is. So there's a lot of work gone in here on this asset description on the right-hand side. And as you see, I can see here, blow molder, CO2 blow molder scrap recovery conveyor. I know exactly what that is. As a tradesman, I can go straight over to it. I can open it up. I can pull the drawings out. Really easy to find what that is. The asset number isn't the critical bit in this. The asset number to me is largely used to keep everything ordered and organized. The asset description is really where you want to focus your time. So to summarize the asset tree, what would that look like if we wrote it up into a bit of an operating procedure? And this is, I suppose what's something that you could take away as a next step is for this particular business, this is our naming convention. It's 3 letters, 4 digits, 2 numbers, 2 letters. And you can see the rest of that naming convention as we go. The important thing in deciding your tree to start with is decide what this looks like, because you don't all need 4 or 5 digits at each stage. I work with some businesses where there's only 2 digits at each level, and that works fine for them. They don't need to say 30 PLA, which signifies a production area. They can just say 30 because that's, their codes don't have any other meaning in their site. So think about that. That's down to L6. You'll see L5, L6, and further here. I'm just using numbers 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. Again, just to keep things in order. That code's not really needed to tell you what that machine asset type is, what it is. That's all in the actual master data details. Right, number 2. So that's our asset tree. Second thing that I see adds massive value to people is our PM naming convention. I want to look at the name of a PM, the naming description, and like looking at these, these ingredients and the nutritional facts, I want to know what's in the box. I want to know what's that PM all about. And this is quite a simple one to go through. So the problems I see, again, there's either no naming convention or we've got an overly complex naming convention. If there's no naming convention or PMs, it might be, boiler inspection is probably one of the worst ones I've seen, or conveyor inspection. You don't know who it is. You don't know if it's electrical. As a reliability engineer, I group all of that together for a machine. I really can't see what's going on. Again, with this one, all of the information I'm going to recommend you put in your name, PM name, is usually hidden away in the background in the PM anyway. What we're trying to do here is think out how much more useful is it to have this information in the name where everybody can see it straight away. You know, your tradesmen don't have access always to go looking at the details in your PM. When you're scheduling, you're normally looking at this on one screen. You haven't got all of this other information available to you. So instead of having no naming convention or overly complex, we want our Goldilocks name, don't we? You know, not too hot, not too cold, just right in the middle. And we want that name to be useful to everybody. Yeah? So whether I'm the planner, the scheduler, the reliability engineer, I want the name to be useful. So let me share with you what I do. First of all, frequency, 04W, obviously it's a 4 weekly. On the frequency, I always try to use weeks. So if it's an annual PM, for example, 52 weeks. The only thing I usually leave monthly or annual are compliance tasks. You know, there's some things, fire extinguisher tasks, must be done every month. So they stay as a monthly because it's a paperwork reconciliation. But for most other things, it's 04W. Why the 0? Well, again, the 0 is there to force the order. If you don't have that 0, it thinks 4 and 40 go together, for example. Becomes a bit of a mess if you ever export this stuff into Excel. And also some systems will just sort them. So it knows 4 goes before 30, for example. If you don't have that 0 in there, you have a 4 weekly and a 30 weekly, some systems will automatically put the 3 of the 30 before the 4. So it's difficult to read. Second thing, I want to know what trade I'm using. MEC in this case. Usually do 4 digits, and I try to make it the same naming that I've used somewhere in the CMMS. There's going to be a trade code option. I want to know my equipment status, stopped or running. Do I need spare parts for this job? And then just a bit of a description of what the job is. So in this case, filler suction cup change out. I can see from this, it's 4 weekly, mechanical, it needs the line stopped. I need to organize spare parts for it, and it's a filler suction cup change out. So I'll share with you a couple of, and you'll get these slides to sort of copy some of these. We'll share with you some other examples. You know, 52 weekly mechanical running, no spare parts. It's an interlocks conveyor inspection. Then we can put in some hours, obviously. You know, we want many of our PMs to be hours or cycles based. Electrician, service provider. The one at the bottom there that I find useful is SJ, as I call it. And there's a system here in Australia which calls it a standard job. And what a standard job is, it's our PM, but it's a manually triggered one, or it's triggered, in this case, it's a gearbox oil change, triggered from the results from an oil sample. So we don't know when that's going to be. It's based on something else. It's based on an alarm system. So the SJ really means you can group that job. You can create an operating procedure for it. Inside that job is everything you would expect from a PM. It's got your task list, your spare parts, your drawings, your procedures. They're all there, but it's not going to be triggered like a normal PM. Okay, so that's our naming. Very, very simple, super easy to implement. And you just imagine now, if you look at your backlog and imagine all of your PMs were organized with that, just think how much easier this scheduling process would be. How much more visibility would it give your planner, your scheduler, over what's going on in that list. Just on PMs. Okay, this is old Hamlet and to be or not to be. I have a bit of a sort of a thorn in my side. It's a constant discussion point. And I say this, to fix or not to fix. Now, you'll all be aware, obviously, when we set our PMs up, we have some different options in there, don't we? And generally the terminology can be, we can have a fixed PM. So what I mean by that, if it's a 4 weekly, or a monthly, for example, on the 1st of the month, it's going to come out on the 1st of the month, every month, regardless of what else is happening in the system. So that's fixed. We have trigger from date last done, which means if we have a 4 weekly, that 4 weekly will trigger from the last time the job was done. So it might not be, if a job gets done, that 4 weekly stretches to 6 weekly, it's going to come out in 4 weeks' time, not 2 weeks' time as it would if it was fixed. And the third option normally is what we see as hierarchy. And in hierarchy are 1 weekly, 2 weekly, 4 weekly jobs. But when the 4 weekly is done, it includes the 1 and the 2s and groups them all together. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes going through this. And this is normally quite an in-depth discussion. So I'm going to summarize it as quick as I can. Most of my clients are manufacturing businesses, highly sort of operationally intensive and variable. So I never use hierarchy. And the reason I don't use hierarchy is if you imagine what that hierarchy would look like. So we've got 1 weekly, 2 weekly, 4 weekly, 6 monthly, annual, as an example, PMs on a machine. When the annual is due, normally all of the other PMs would not come out. You just get this one big annual inspection come out. Now that might be an annual overhaul. So that might be, let's say it's a 8 or 16 hour job, which is great. So now we're trying to work on how do we schedule this into our business. Now, most dynamic manufacturing businesses in the chaos, it's not easy to schedule a 16-hour shut. So what happens is that job gets pushed back. And now you're thinking, well, it's an annual, it's a big overhaul. That's not so much of a problem. But what you've got to remember is because we've got hierarchy ticked, that big annual job that's getting pushed back has also got all our basic weekly lubrication tasks in it. So the longer it gets pushed back, the more we're missing out on these basic, if it was a car, we're not actually filling it with petrol or checking the tire pressure. We're waiting for a major service. So that's going to lead to problems. The flip side to that with hierarchy, very good if you know that machine will be stopped. There's a schedule. If it's an aeroplane that's going to come into the hangar every 6 months, hierarchy works well. I see it generally works well in very asset-intensive industries or highly regulated industries. So I don't use hierarchy. With fixed, I tend to use fixed less. So I'll use fixed only for things that are, again, regulatory, so must be done every month or must be done every 4 weeks. Or if there is a cycle, working with a client at the moment, they've got 36 machines, we're doing 1 machine per day on a fixed cycle. So in that case, I need the PMs to all come out fixed the same time frame every single time. The problem with fixed, though, if your production schedule varies and you can't guarantee you're going to get the machine at the same time every month or every quarter. Let's say, for example, we've got a 6 weekly lubrication PM, and for whatever reason it gets missed, it gets pushed back, and it gets done 5 weeks late. That's okay. We've done our lubrication, but if fixed, the following week that PM is going to come out again, and potentially then you're lubricating a week apart instead of 6 weeks apart. And that's when you're going to start over maintaining and doing some damage to your equipment. So to fix or not to fix, probably the biggest discussion point I have with clients, and one to be very cautious of as you go through setting up your system. Okay, next, job category. So this is, nearly all CMMSs, they've got some sort of job category in there. And, what happens? What do I see? Well, the problem I see is that we try to use the job category for planning and prioritization. So we put a job category in, for example, this one's corrective maintenance, this one's predictive, this one's safety, this one's QA. And then the schedule, so I've got to do all my safety stuff first. Yeah. But that's not the priority. This is a category. Yeah, it's a tag almost. What the best businesses do is they set up their job types or job categories purely for reporting and analysis. So this section here, this is all about being able to ask, looking back and saying, where did we spend our time? What type of activities are we working on? And is that value add to the business? Okay, so we want to look back and say, look, last week or the last month, what type of work have we been doing? Is it controlled? Is it reactive? Is it chaos? Is it breakdowns? And there's a bit of a set of job categories that I've put together that help with that. And with this one, actually, it was interesting. I went out to quite a few LinkedIn forums, went out to the Upkeep, the community on Slack there, and said, guys, share with me all the different job types and categories you use. And it was really interesting to see they were all very, very similar. Yeah, they were all very, very similar. So I've tailored this a little bit and got a couple of people using this at the moment, and it's working quite well. So in my mind, when I look at this, when I'm looking back as a maintenance manager or reliability manager, I'm looking back in time to say, how are we spending our time? So I'm thinking, what's important to me here? And to me, there's really two categories to start with. We've got triggered work, which has come out of the system. So this is what we would call generally our PM generated, but it's system generated. It's on a cycle, it's time based, or it's cycles based, hours based, but it's automatically coming out the system. Then on the other side, we've got corrective work, improvement work. We've got things that aren't automatically generated by the system. We're going to break these down a little bit more now. So again, got my reliability engineer's hat on. That's great. I can see those. And, normally that's where businesses stop. That's our pie chart, is triggered or corrective. But in our triggered work, we've got two types of that. We've got scheduled, triggered work with a reliability focus. And then we've got scheduled triggered work with no reliability focus. What goes in there? I group our reliability focus. We've got things like visual inspections. We've got lubrication routings. We've got predictive maintenance. These are the types of activities I want to look back and see how much time am I spending in each of these boxes. And service replacement. So visual inspections, differences, I'd say service replacement is that, every 1,000 cycles, we're going to change a seal or we're going to change a pump. That's the type of thing I'm putting in service. It's more of a task, whereas the inspection is check, check, check. So reliability engineer, I want to look and see how much of this is happening. On the non-reliability focus, what do I mean by that? Well, here I've got things like, administration checks, calibration, production activities. Often there's QA and safety checks, statutory checks, checking fire extinguishers, that type of stuff. So it's not based on reliability, but often it ends up in our CMMS because it's a good place for it to be. So very important when we're looking back to be able to see, how much of our trades time is actually spent in this area. It's always surprising when I look and see, hang on guys, of all of the PMs we've got in the system, 50% are actually helping the business improve our reliability. 50% are just kind of administration stuff that aren't really maintenance activities. Let's have a look at our corrective improvement work. And again, I split this into two categories. You've got corrective work that can go through the planning and scheduling process properly. It's organized, it's been identified, it might come in as a request, all organized and scheduled correctly. Then on the other side, we've got reactive break-in work, or, this could be breakdowns or tap on the shoulder for the tradesman to go and do something. Next level. What can these both look like? Well, our planned work, administration, we've got corrective work, corrective from a PM, QA, OH&S improvement activity. Again, your business will be slightly different. Might have more, might have less, might have different ones. From a break-in or corrective work, and this is the tradesman doing, purely reactive stuff. It's not on his schedule. He's just gone to do the job. I find they split into four categories. Administration type stuff. Production has been impacted. Might be a breakdown, might be a machine running slow. No production impact. We're helping operations with something, but the machine's not stopped. We've worked around it. And then the real red flag, not production or operations related at all. And that's, hey, we've had an audit. Can you go and put a pin board up in the office for me quick? Don't bother with your PMs. We've got to react to this completely non-value adding job. So this down the bottom here, some CMMSs you will find have a two-tiered approach to job categories. So you could have these four at the top level is category one, and then you drill down into the others. Some, and this is fairly more typical, only have one sort of section. So this can look quite complicated because here we've got close to 20 different categories there, once you combine all of them together. But it's actually not as complicated as it looks, because let's put our user hat on. So these orange ones, the reliability engineers are going to set and forget them when we create the PMs. Yeah? They're set once, they're never touched again. These ones here for planned and scheduled corrective work, well, the planner selects these when he's scoping the work. Yeah. So as a planner, I can look at this and I've only got 6 to choose from. Then as a tradesman, when I'm doing my reactive break-in work, they can only use these 4 at the end. So I've only got 4 to choose from. So the reality of, while it looks complex, very, very simple to use. And often I'll just put a little bit of a naming convention there. So, this first category of scheduled work might start with a 1 or an S. Breakdown reactive stuff at the end might start with a B or an R. So just some way to easily categorize them. So that's job categories. Now, priorities. Priorities are the most underutilized tool I see in any CMMS. They're the one where the most arguments happen. And that argument happens because usually the priorities have been set in the system as time-based. So everything is urgent. Yeah, we're asking people, when do you want it done by? And the priorities are set by gut feel without rules. Okay, so I don't know if any of you have ever seen, or you've got priority settings that look like this. Urgent within 3 days, 7, 14. This is actually the default settings for a system I've used. You give operations the option of these, and of course it's going to be urgent or within 3 days, isn't it? It's, that's human nature, because people perceive this as not what's the priority or when should the job be done by, when does the job need to be done by. What people see is, when do I want the job done by? And we all want things done quickly because it's impacting us. So that just does not work. What we want to do, though, is we want to look at, how do we get a risk-based approach? And how do we get it so that everybody understands the prioritization process? So I'm going to take you through the risk-based approach that I've found works really well. The understanding of it is really this communication culture piece where people know, okay, I've put the job in, but even though it's a priority, in this example, in my priority 4 within 2 weeks, if every other job in the system is a priority 1, I have to understand as the user, as the customer, that I'm at the bottom of the queue. And that's a real communication piece with your customer, the operations team, or the trades. What do I do with this risk piece? Very, very simple. Not easy to do, but very, very simple. We take a standard risk assessment, and for every job that comes in, we do a bit of a risk assessment on it. And in this example, it's, what's the likelihood of failure versus the consequence of this failure happening. And we give it a low, medium, high rating. Now, this works best if you can actually use, I've got one client at the moment, and what they're using the risk assessment, or the assessment process they used for their asset criticality ranking. They're actually using it, the same assessment in here. So that looks at things like safety impact, cost of repair, quality, product quality, or waste impact. So the job goes through this process. And what that means is then every job is allocated low, medium, high, or very high. Most cases, there's probably a few more levels in there that would be useful. So as the user, the person putting the request in, makes sense to me. I know where I am on the list. But as the maintenance team, we need a little bit more information. What we need is to match that somehow then to say, low, medium, high, very high. What does that mean around setting some expected completion times? Because it's all very well to say, we're going to do all the highs first, or the very highs first, then the highs. But a medium that's been in the system for 12 months, probably need to do something about that. So what I do there is I allocate for each of these levels, how quickly should we get that job done? And these are just examples, very high within 7 days, 14, 28, 56. Different businesses have different, different urgencies. You'll notice there's nothing in there for today, because to me, anything that needs to be done in the next day or two needs to be handled by the trades and the supervisors. You're not going to get it through a CMMS process, a proper planning and scheduling process, quick enough for it to be actioned. So yeah, needs to be in the next couple of days. Go and grab the tradesman if it's that urgent. Get it done then. Treat it as a break-in, breakdown. That setting of the priority leads us very nicely into our next section, which is important dates. There's 2 critical dates that I like to have in my CMMS. So the first one is the date raised. You All systems have this. There's no way around it. And it's the second one is our due date. So date raised, it's the date the job was created. You're looking, it's useful to see how long jobs have been in the system for. You're looking at the age of your jobs, usually a very, very standard feature. But the second one, though, is our due date. And the due date I use as it's the date after which you want to consider the job is now overdue. Okay. So the date, job's been in the system. But what time are we saying that job's, it's been there hanging around long enough now? We really need to be doing something about that. So how do we calculate this due date? Well, if it's a PM, what I do is I take the date the job was raised and I add 10% of the frequency. An annual PM, for example, 10% of an annual is about 37 days, 36 and a half days. So I take the date raised might be today. My due date is 36, 37 days from now. And that's when that job will flag as red. This is now overdue. So it's saying for every PM, we've got a bit of a window of opportunity to get stuff done. For corrective maintenance, this is where now we can bring on our priority time frame. So I'm saying the due date for a corrective job is the date raised plus whatever time frame I've allowed for that priority. So you remember in the previous slide, we said low priority jobs need to be done within 56 days. So in this case, our date raised plus 56 gives us our due date for that job. What that allows you to do, particularly as sort of maintenance manager, planner, scheduler, you're not worried too much about jobs as they get old in the system if they're lower priority. It's often I see people say, this job's been in there for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, we've got to get it done. But if it's a lower priority, that's not necessarily the right decision to make. And using this due date can actually give you a better visibility around your priorities. So that's that bit on there. Okay, final bit I want to talk about. This is the status stacker, as I call it. And again, one of the most important parts of the whole system is our work order statuses. How do we track the status of our jobs all the way through? Now, I'll just come back to the work order journey very quickly, and then I'll show you the statuses that I use. So in a very basic form, we're going to identify our work as a request. Someone's going to scope the work. What do we do? How are we doing it? We're going to get all the parts kitted, hand it over to our stores team. We're going to schedule the job. We're going to complete the work. And finally, we're going to review this in a continuous improvement loop. Now, many systems out of the box, the statuses are kind of, they're limited. You might have, it's an open job, it's waiting on parts, it's scheduled, started and complete. And that 4 or 5, yep, they're okay for a small team with not many jobs. But once you get into hundreds or thousands of jobs in your system, you want a bit more visibility about where they are in that workflow. So here's the statuses that I use. And on the left-hand side, this is generally the person who I'd say is responsible for managing them in the system. Okay, so we start off with our job as a request. I then use a status. I'm going to hand that over to the planner now to start planning this job. So I have waiting on scoping and issued for scoping. And those two tell me, waiting on scoping is the planner's sort of to-do list. These are the jobs he's got to go or she's got to go and actually scope. Issued for scoping, sometimes it's the trades or a supervisor who's doing that job preparation scoping. But once that's done, we're going to hand over to the stores person. And I use a status of waiting on store. This is like the store person's digital inbox. So any job each day that goes into waiting on store, I know I've got to go and look at that, work out what to do with it. And some of the things I can do with it, I can send, I might be waiting on a quote. I might be waiting on financial approval. I can order the parts and have them waiting on delivery. And I have one called ready to pick, which means all the parts are actually in the store. I just need to go and get them off the shelf. So ready to pick is an important one because I don't want to be picking every job individually. I might go as a storeman, I might just go and pick my jobs for the last half hour of the day. So I want to be batching all of this through the system. So of course, once everything is picked, it's kitted, it's sat in its parts tub, the job becomes ready to schedule. And then we're over to our scheduler. Sometimes this is all the same person, by the way, just wearing different hats through the day. The job becomes scheduled and we pass it on to our supervisor and our trades. It's in progress. And then, of course, it starts to be completed. We're back to our planner. I have one here called completed waiting on paperwork. I use this for jobs that are, look, the work's been completed, but we might be waiting for a service report to come in or a final invoice, or if it's calibration, we might be waiting for a certificate. So it's a way to mark that job as the work's done, but don't close it off just yet. And then we have a couple of admin ones: on hold, close completed, and cancelled. Now, again, people look at this, whoa, too many, I don't need all of those. Again, it's what's the right size for your business. If you've got 1,000 jobs in your backlog and you do have a planner, a storeman, and a supervisor, then you very much do need all of these, because it allows you, just look at that stores one. Generally, I'm seeing, 10% of your work might be sat in those green boxes. How good would it be able to look through and see just all of the parts that are waiting on delivery? They've been ordered, but versus how many quotes have I got to do? And the beauty of that, as one example, is the storeman can come into this, filter the backlog by waiting on quote, and spend half an hour chasing up their quotes with the supplier. Makes life a lot easier. For the maintenance manager, this is the final slide. For the maintenance manager, where's that useful? Well, one very simple report I pull out of this is, our backlog by status. And what I'm using this for, it allows visibility of the bottlenecks. I can see our jobs getting stopped through the system somewhere. Our idea obviously is we want to get everything to the point where it's ready to schedule, waiting to go onto a schedule. But often we see things caught up in the store, or we've got jobs that aren't being scoped quickly enough. It allows you to see which of your team needs some assistance. And bonus points if your CMMS can show what I call stagnant work. So if you've got a system that can show you, hey, this job's been at this status for more than 10 days or whatever parameter you can put in it, perfect, absolutely perfect little system, because then your team are actually keeping everything moving. You want to think of this as a hose pipe, and you want the water to keep flowing through that hose pipe from initial request to completed job. I'll take a breath. Everybody, it's been a pleasure to present that and share that with you. I trust it was all useful. We've got to hang around now for a few more questions. I'll ask Heather to come back online, but if most of you are already connected on LinkedIn, but feel free again to reach out LinkedIn. There's some other resources on my website, and if you want to send me an email, feel free. So I'll hand over to you, Heather, to see if we've got any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to put all of that together, as well as present with us today. We did have a few questions come in through the presentation, and I just sent another reminder, but any other questions, we do have a few minutes at the end of our time here. So please feel free to send any more questions for Simon through. The first question that I saw was regarding the asset tree naming conventions. Is there a specific formula that you've seen work better than others?
To be honest, I use something very, very similar to the one that I've just shown. I think that question's come from someone who I think I know what CMMS they're using. So very similar. The example I showed you is actually from the same system that I believe you are using. And that's the one that I generally find works well. Yeah. So I suppose the only difference would be a little bit of changes to how many digits you're using at each level. So, what the example I showed you there, where some levels had 5 digits and some had 4, if I was setting something up from scratch, I'd probably try and reduce that a little bit if possible. But as I say, that example there was already a preset thing we had to work with. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Next question as well is, do many CMMSs let you change the backlog date rules within, for example, the PM date plus or minus 10% frequency?
I'm speaking from, I suppose, limited exposure to all of the ones out there, but I know the ones I'm familiar with do. So some of the very bigger ones, an SAP, I'm not sure. I know certainly Maximo does, Mex does, Upkeep. I think there's Upkeep, you can even put your custom fields in. So there's, it might not come with it out the box, but you can certainly drag a field across to put something like that in. So the date rules, that 10% frequency, where that flows through to the dates in those systems, I'm not sure, but I've seen most systems will allow you to, sometimes it's called, I've seen one where it's how many days until this job is overdue. Sometimes it's lead time. So there's all different things there.
Awesome. And then our last question that I see here, I know, Ronald, you'll like this one as well. This question's from Marty, says, are these options available in Upkeep to the best of your knowledge?
Some. And I actually had a session before this last week with a couple of the upkeep gurus to make sure that they were. And while some of them aren't necessarily out of the box available, there is definitely a way we can achieve the same end result through some manipulation. And some of them are features that I know last week the multi-level sites was rolled out. I know the multi-level assets is getting very, very close. So certainly most of these features were certainly in development. And there are a couple of them which I know there's definitely ways where we can work around that to achieve the end result.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer too. The next question, we just got another one in here from Mike, says, what is your favorite CMMS system?
Upkeep, of course.
Yeah. You don't have to be biased.
No, look, Mike, it is sort of a biased answer because it's not so much my favorite, but the vast majority of my work here in Australia is with a system called MEX. Every system is different for every business. MEX over here has got a large market share, so that's why I've used it. Again, you go to, and I know there's other people on the call at the moment who are just going through the due diligence of which software package do they use. And it's funny, I know different people are using different packages. So a favorite from mine, as I say, it's a favorite is what you're used to, really. But everything for different reasons. And look, it's really interesting that you can actually look at the different packages you've read. If I take, for example, the difference between an Upkeep and a Maximo or an SAP, they're designed in completely different ways with a completely different user interface. Now, if I was a, let's say, for example, Coca-Cola use Maximo. It's very, big corporate, very sort of rigid structures. They've got the resources to drive that. I know other businesses where it's a brand new system and the guys are really engaged, used to using tablets, used to being engaged on a tablet, and Upkeep's the perfect option for them. So it's really about, my favorite is what I'm used to using. But yeah, if you were sort of looking to use that, where should you go? Just do your due diligence and really look at what you're trying to get out of the system.
Yeah, I would add there too, a lot of what I hear is that, a lot of the CMMS platforms on the market have similar features and functionality. It kind of is then the differentiators are in the staffing and the interface and the, flexibility in certain ways and things like that. But yeah, good answer.
That's it. And if I get it, I think it also comes down as well to, I see a lot of places trying to use paper because the maybe the mobile interface of some legacy products isn't as good now. But again, particularly here, I see our tradesmen's. The tradesmen here are kind of split. I see a lot of sort of coming up to the end of the career where paper is good, but the guys coming out of trade school now, they're not going to use paper. They need to jump straight into a tablet. They're used to an app, and I think that's where some of the software, even if it's a legacy software with add-ons, that's the product we've got to be giving our staff as they come on board now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you to all of our attendees and those who ask questions. It's always great to get a conversation going right at the end there. So thank you once again. I hope everyone has an awesome rest of their day, and I will see you all next time.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Simon.
Bye now.
Bye.